Hello, my name is Chloe Knox. In this video, I'll be demonstrating flexibility assessments on a partner. I was originally planning to meet up with another student from class, but they weren't able to meet in person, so I had to use my resources. The Apley Test assesses mobility of the shoulder complex. This person has a good range of motion and shoulder extension, meaning their anterior deltoid isn't tight. As for shoulder flexion, ideally the humerus should be in line with the ear. This individual has a good range of motion here, but if not, then it would be most likely due to a tight latissimus dorsi or pectorals. The Apley Test mainly assesses mobility of the external and internal rotators of the shoulder. Normal range of motion is the fingertips 1 fist length apart. Here seems to be a normal range of motion. His fingertips were about 4.5 inches apart. Now we're going to begin on the other side. He appears to be symmetrical in regards to range of motion. On this side, his fingertips were 4 inches apart, so it appears that he has more range of motion when his right shoulder is on top. This could mean more range of motion in his external rotators in relation to the left shoulder, and or more range of motion in his right arm internal rotators. So there is a small bilateral asymmetry in his shoulder mobility. This could increase the risk of injury and cause muscle imbalances if it is not addressed through programming. To improve range of motion, I would have the individual use primarily free weights and open circuit exercises to promote the use of more range of motion. The individual would also benefit from stretching his external and internal rotators. A corrective exercise for the asymmetry could include T-reaches coupled with external rotation and internal rotation with a resistance band. Next is the trunk flexion test. Here I'm going to be using a goniometer to make sure the knees are flexed at a 90-degree angle before starting. And from the curvature of the spine, you can see that a lot of mobility comes from the thoracic spine. If the lumbar spine was tight, then we would see less curvature in that area. The posterior view allows you to see if there is any pelvic tilt during spinal flexion. Here it seems there is no pelvic tilt. Limits in spinal flexion are important to know for exercise programming. If a person had limited range of motion in their lumbar spine, this could mean difficulty performing deadlifts or other compound movements. A tight lumbar spine could also contribute to an anterior pelvic tilt if it continued to worsen. Child's pose is a stretch which could help lengthen the lumbar spine. It is also a good idea to incorporate exercises that would strengthen the lower abdominals, such as hanging toe touches, if the person is capable, or V-ups. Next is the trunk extension assessment. Here we are assessing flexibility in the lower abdominals and the iliopsoas. The top portion of the participant's pelvis has come off the floor a little, so there could be a potential tightness in the hip flexors or lower abdominals. A tightness in this area could contribute to a posterior pelvic tilt if it worsened. In this situation, we would want to stretch the abdominals, the iliopsoas, and strengthen the lumbar spine and the quadriceps. I would incorporate trunk extension and forward lunges with an extended knee to stretch the participant's lower abdominals and iliopsoas. Forward lunges could be used unilaterally to strengthen the quadriceps. Back extensions could also help strengthen the lumbar spine while stretching the lower abdominals. Next, we're assessing bilateral hip flexion. The goal of this assessment is to be able to reach 120 degrees of hip flexion while maintaining a neutral pelvis. With a goniometer, I measured the angle of hip flexion from the acetabulum. Here are the results. The picture isn't the clearest, but the participant reached 100 degrees of hip flexion, so his hip extensors are tight. Tight hip extensors could inhibit a lot of exercises in a program and could really impact form. High box step-ups, deficit reverse lunges, good mornings, and single leg RDLs are all good exercises to lengthen the glutes and proximal hamstrings. Here's the knee flexion assessment. This is mainly assessing range of motion of the rectus femoris due to the knee flexion coupled with hip extension. If the client abducts or flexes their hip, then they need to extend their knee slightly. Since the heel of the participant is within 2 inches of their gluteal and it is the same on the other side, his rectus femoris doesn't seem to be tight. If the participant did struggle with this position, then form for compound movements such as back squats and front squats could be compromised. As a corrective strategy, I would implement exercises such as forward lunges, goblet squats, and a rectus femoris stretch to help strengthen and lengthen the quadriceps. Next is the active straight leg raise test. This assesses mobility in the hamstrings and calves due to the angle of hip flexion, extended knee, and flexed foot. No abduction or knee flexion should occur. Looking back, it would have made more sense for me to keep the goniometer more parallel to the floor, mirroring the angle of the trunk. Therefore, this reading may be slightly inaccurate, but as you can see, he did not reach 90 degrees. The goniometer says 45 degrees of hip flexion. His right side was the same in relation to mobility. It was also about 45 degrees of hip flexion. From this assessment, we can conclude that he has limited mobility along his hamstrings. This could prevent proper form in deadlifts and could also put him at a higher risk for injury. Exercises such as good mornings and single leg RDLs would help his imbalance. He could also benefit from more dynamic hamstring stretches such as floor sweeps or toe touches. Here we're going to be performing the Thomas test. When the knee is extended, the test assesses the iliopsoas. You want to make sure the hip doesn't abduct at any point during the test. Here the participant has reached a level of hip extension beyond 0 degrees, a negative number, so he is passed. Ideally, a goniometer or inclinometer would be used in this situation. There appears to be no asymmetry in iliopsoas flexibility, and the participant appears to have an optimal amount of range of motion. Next, the rectus femoris is being stretched in relation to the knee being flexed. The participant has passed this assessment. His hip can extend to 0 degrees. The right rectus femoris appears to be a little bit tighter since it took him some time to relax into the position of 0 degrees hip extension. In this situation, there may be a small imbalance in rectus femoris tightness. The participant needs corrective exercises such as forward lunges to unilaterally stretch the tighter quadricep. If there had been tightness in the iliopsoas, then corrective strategies such as an extended leg toe touch or squatting frog lunges could be used to lengthen the muscle. That is all I have for this video. In the next one, I'll be performing the assessments myself.